encourage you just to be on mute, because it'll help the sound quality for everybody else that's listening, and also the quality of recording for Zoom as well. That doesn't stop you asking questions. It's going to be a mixture of me screen sharing, talking through some material, and opportunities for you to chat to each other in the breakout rooms, and then in sort of plenary discussions as well. So obviously at that point, feel very free to unmute yourselves. You can use the chat to post questions as well. So Mark will be monitoring the chat, not in a dictatorial 1984 type way, but just to kind of pick up if there's any questions that come out that we need to pick up on, because with a larger group it can just be easier to do that, so that we can respond to things. Is that okay? Has anybody got any burning questions before we make a start? Anything I haven't said that you're not clear about? Okay, post in the chat if you need to. So we'll
John's just asking in the chat if everybody's had a chance to review the questionnaire.
Oh yes, good point. Yes, did people get the questionnaire on email and have a chance to look at it before the session? Yeah, I'm not going to be asking you because I'm marking your homework or anything. We're just curious.
Yes, and nods and
yeah. And you'll get a chance to have a little think about that with some of your colleagues in the session beforehand. But it's just a questionnaire that I've developed from the work that I've been doing with teams over quite a few years now. So I'll sort of kick off formally, really. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Jane Lewis. I've been running my own company called Together People for about 15 years now. And I got really interested in trust probably about 25 years ago. I think it was always a big issue for me in and around the family. So just because of upbringing and family situations. And I think up until about my mid-20s, I thought it was a very interpersonal thing. You know, it affected your own individual relationships with other people. But in the mid-90s, I was working as a fairly recent graduate with Yorkshire Water. And for any of you that actually were around and remember the mid-90s, there was a little problem with a drought, and Yorkshire Water won the race to be the first water company to get into the situation where we literally ran out of water. So we were tankering it, we were building pipelines across the county, and it was deeply, deeply damaging in terms of the water industry, but for us as an organisation, because the sort of relationship you want with your water company is to pay them some money, as little as possible, and to be able to turn your tap on and flush your toilet, and for those things to happen without any contact at all with your water company. That's what you want. We kind of epically failed. So we lost the trust of all our customers, and we then had to spend quite a period of time rebuilding that as an organisation. And I suppose it was that point where I realised that the trust thing was absolutely massive, because it wasn't just interpersonal, it was team, it was organisational, it was society, and there were so many things that were unwritten about trust in terms of people's expectations as well. So that's kind of where this comes from, and I've been on a journey ever since, really. It's been a subject which has kind of fascinated me, and I suppose the session we're going to do today is sort of exploring that a bit further. And I'm so interested to hear your sort of perspectives on this, and every time I work with different groups of people, there's always fascinating insights to be had from those within the group. So I don't expect this afternoon to be any different. So right, I'm going to just screen share now some slides. So if I can competently do that, that will be good. So hopefully you can see my PowerPoint. Yeah, okay, good. Right, so that's showing, yeah. Okay, so oh, I click on. That's it. Sorry. So what we said in this session is we would be exploring some areas about what is trust, how do we go about building it, how do we know whether it's there or not, what impact does it have in our teams, the people we work alongside, in our relationships, what happens when we lose trust in other people, and then what are our options around that. So that's the sort of way we're going to explore this afternoon together. So I want to start with a little quiz, really. So on the screen, you'll see some roles, and this is from the Ipsos Mori Veracity Index. They run this every 12 months. Now, unfortunately, we haven't got the 2020 results because it's not been published yet for the UK. But every year they ask people whether they would generally trust individuals who are in these roles to actually tell them the truth. So I'll let you have a little look at that list of people, and I don't know whether anybody feels that they'd like to sort of take a punt on what sort of proportions we might see against some of these sort of roles. So if anybody wants to jump in and share thoughts, please do. You can unmute yourselves and give me a view.
I suspect that the lowest are estate agents, government ministers and politicians, with ordinary persons in the street being higher than any of those.
Mm-hmm.
And yep. The topmost ones being people like nurses and doctors, possibly teachers.
Yeah, okay. Thanks, Brian. Any other thoughts?
Yeah, I think in the last 10 years, bankers have had a very bad rep and they haven't really recovered.
Yeah.
If I was to regale to you some things I've learned recently about doctors abandoning an 8-year-old child with a brain tumour, I wouldn't trust the doctor at the moment.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it?
If anybody wants it.
Yeah, so it's about you may well have an opportunity to kind of share that in your breakout room, you know, a bit later on. But yeah, I think people's, you know, this is obviously a poll that gets done, but that's a really good example of how responses to these questions get impacted by our own personal experience, isn't it? Any other thoughts? Anybody want to take a bit of a guess about where you think ordinary person in the street might be? So above or below 50% of people? Have you got any thoughts on that?
Can I add something else, Jane? There's a general view at the moment that, and it's a phrase you get from Northern Ireland, but it's more important to trust the old woman up the mountain with whatever they say than it is to trust anybody else. In other words, people's perceptions are becoming far more important than facts. Particularly in the scientific field. Yeah.
Given, I think that we can question what is a fact, given how much false news goes around.
Oh,
you know, like 5G and COVID, what's a fact?
I would agree with that as well, Tony. But I think I would put something else on it, which is, and I see it a lot, it's okay to be a nerd. Nobody likes a clever clogs in this country. And that includes anybody with a qualification. So we've got some real fundamental societal problems floating around.
Yeah.
So but I still wouldn't agree with you, Tony, what is a fact?
I'm from Sheffield, and ordinary person in the street, I would put above police officers and judges.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, my observation, not my perspective, I think that what is sometimes termed kind of horizontal trust, which is that trusting your fellow man, is definitely on the up, and we see that manifested in things like Airbnb, Love Your Home Share, eBay, all that sort of stuff. People place a lot of trust in people that they don't know, but they think they might have some sort of connection with, even if it's interior design. But I think what we're noticing is probably since exacerbated and accelerated by the banking crisis and the expenses scandal, vertical trust is almost gone, and almost by default now. And I think this chimes with some of the things that Kevin and others are saying. Almost if you put yourself up there as being above other people, then people are innately skeptical, if not cynical.
Ben, I think that's a better way of putting it in terms of the differential between vertical trust and horizontal trust. Yeah.
Okay. Right. Well, thank you for contributions around that. I'm going to move us on because we have got limited time this afternoon. So I'm now going to reveal what the percentages are. So there we go. That's the October 2019. As I said, it would have been fascinating to have this year's data, really. But that's where we are. So ordinary person in the street, basically 2/3 of people are saying, I would trust the person that I walk up to in the street. So that horizontal peer-to-peer that people were just talking about. But interestingly, medical profession, education, scientists, judges, so there's some residual sort of hierarchical, vertical trust, if you like, of people in positions who hold responsibilities in the in society as being, at the moment, as of October 2019, generally more trustworthy. Fascinating to see what happens when the poll comes out again. And then again, you've got civil servants at 65%, but then government ministers and politicians generally down at sort of pretty low percentages, really. And the position of bankers has indeed moved over time. So the figures fluctuate. This poll's been done over quite a number of years now, and it does vary from country to country as well. But I think it gives an insight, if you like, a snapshot, a picture of where trust is at, and how people see that in terms of being reflected by whether they think somebody they speak to will actually tell them the truth. So yeah, just a bit of data for you, bit of information, because we like a bit of data. So there are lots and lots of definitions of trust, and the one I've put up here is from the OED. So this idea of trust being a firm belief in the reliability, truth, or ability of someone or something, which is probably a kind of widely held view of trust at a very broad level. So I want to put us now into breakout rooms and get you sharing with each other your experience of trust. So I'd like you to think about a couple of things, really. How do you know if trust is there or not? So you might want to think about, what do you see, hear, feel in those relationships, where it is or it's absent. And where would you say your trust levels are? We've just looked at the sort of UK, or a subset of the UK population as a whole. But the responses to the questionnaire might give you a clue, because for some people, a score of 10 is never going to happen. And for other people, they have such a positive view of their sort of fellow human being that they couldn't imagine scoring a 1 or 2 on any relationship. So I'm not asking you to share numbers out of your questionnaire, but you might want to just think about your own trust levels. So we're going to pop you into breakout rooms for a few minutes to have a conversation with others, and then we'll bring you back. You'll get a 60-second sort of notification that we're about to stop the breakout rooms, and you'll be in groups of 3, my colleague informs me, so hopefully that will be good. Are there any questions before we pop you out into breakout rooms. If you've not done this before, you'll get a little dialogue box and it will say you're about to go into a breakout room. And
no, somebody's dropped off, so I'm going to change them to groups of 3s or 4s.
Oh, okay, 3s or 4s, right.
Okay, we're ready to go.
Yeah, I think we're ready to go. Okay, so we'll see you in a few minutes. Just click on the join breakout room. Great.
Oh, Julian, I think, had said that he was off to. Yeah. Oh.
the, shall I put my screen share back on for people coming back into the room?
Yeah, that's probably a good idea. Yes.
Actually, no, let's see people. Maybe. Good. What I've worked out is I get a little subset of people down the side of the presentation, but I can't see everybody.
And you can't see the chat, can you?
No. Can now because I've clicked on it, but.
If you go to, are you in full screen mode? Come out of that if you are.
No.
Okay. Then the chat will be at the side.
Yeah.
There we go.
Please
All right.
It's all worked beautifully.
And we're back.
Welcome back. I don't think we've lost anybody in transit, have we? No. Either. So just to explain, Julian hasn't taken umbrage. He's had to go off and do something. So I think he may well rejoin us a bit later if you're wondering what happened to him. So a question then, what struck you about the conversations you've just had in your group?
How forgetful we are. We forgot what the exam questions were.
No, we were more honest. We just avoided answering them.
Okay. Our Deming Alliance is like herding cats anyway, so you know I can't control what you do in your breakout rooms, and what goes on in the breakout room stays in the breakout room, really.
Well, I think in our case, the two older members were less trusting than the younger member.
Oh. Interesting. Okay.
But given that we were about 20 or 30 years older than him, that's not surprising. It's a big gap.
I banged on about this idea about proximity. So I had a real difference, almost a complete barrier with personal having nothing less than 8 and working society having nothing above 7.
Interesting.
So there's this idea that people I knew who were close to me, who I built relationships with, were completely different, in a completely different space. And then, of course, the ones at the most distant, MPs, government, press and media, down in the 1s and 2s.
Yeah. Thanks for that, Tony.
I do feel that I'm revealing a bit of myself in filling this thing in. I've decided, A, I'm a hard-bitten cynic, and B, my prejudices are showing through in the way I scored people. So I think the result for me is the realization that my biases are there before I encounter people, and they may suffer for that.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, hold that thought, John. So we'll come on to that a bit later. So any more comments? I do want to just keep us moving forward because you're going to have other conversations in your rooms thinking about specifically high trust and low trust environments. So you are going to get more time to just explore this. But is there anything else that particularly struck anybody out of that conversation before we move on? Burning to share. Okay, right, I will move us on. So I'm going to screen share again. And can everybody can hear me okay? Yeah, yep. Sound is fine. Good, great. Okay, right. Do this one. Yeah, okay, good. Right. Hope you can all see my slides now. Yeah, we've just been exploring a little bit in that group about things like levels of trust, and we are going to think about the sort of high and low trust in some of our later conversations. But in terms of scoring on the questionnaire, it's a tool that I've developed over, you've kind of got a cut down version of it really, because I would use it in sort of live environments, usually working with teams that are working together all the time. So we'd be exploring interrelationships between managers, individuals, cross teams, department to department, all of that. But it does help us see things about ourselves. So whether we're cautious people or whether we're risk takers, it helps us see whether we're givers of trust. So whether we're the sort of people that will trust anybody until they stuff up, and then we'll have a conversation about it. or whether you're the person that feels trust must be earned. So you're looking for evidence all the time. You want to build trust, but there's an earning that goes on within that. Or whether you're just quite skeptical. Your trust in mankind, humankind in general is sort of not, maybe not particularly strong. And just the fact that the reality is our past affects our responses to the questionnaire and just how we view relationships. And it affects new people that we come into contact with, because just as John was alluding to, we unfortunately as human beings tend to bring all that baggage with us. Nobody sort of, we're impacted. So whenever you encounter an estate agent, it's always marred by all the previous encounters you've ever had with the estate agency world. And so, they're starting from a very difficult point, estate agents. I'm just using that as an example, but it does impact just how we are when we walk into situations. And actually, for those of us that are working with organizations, as consultants, where we're working alongside, maybe rather than within organizations, we have to understand as well that the organization's attitude to consultants will be influenced by every single consultant that they've ever dealt with previously. So it's just a kind of awareness thing, really. So this is the trust equation. I was dilemmaing about whether to get this to build or not, but I thought it would just be better maybe to put it on screen and we'll sort of talk through it. So this comes from the trusted advisor, but I took their equation and I've kind of tested that out with a number of people over years, and this is where we've sort of got to around the trust equation. So it's built up of rapport, which is my connection with who you are. So our relationship, how we get on together. You then add to that the credibility, which is the believability of what someone is saying to you. So there's where fake news plays into the factors of trust. And whether the person has ever told you the truth or lied to you before, or whether that is a neutral situation. Dependability, which is the reliability of what you do. So basically when I ask you to do something, or you say you're going to do something, are you actually going to do it? And then we add to that intimacy, which is the strength or closeness of a relationship. And if we think about what happens before we meet somebody, if we're introduced to someone by a good friend of ours, or recommended by a member of your family, there's a really strong case that we are therefore more likely to trust that person because of where the introduction to that individual is coming from. So you might not have a strong or close relationship with that individual that you're encountering for the first time, but you do have, it's influenced by who introduced you and in what circumstances you connected with that person. And then I love an equation because I'm a scientist by background. I did chemistry as a degree, but so we like a denominator, and the denominator is self-interest. So that is the agenda of the other person. And we talk about trust being undermined, and often when we're thinking about that, it's because we perceive that the other person has an agenda. Now, everybody's got an agenda, that is just a reality. But it's about whether that agenda is having my best interests at heart, or whether that agenda is about having your best interests at heart. And so because it's a denominator, as self-interest, so if I'm playing out my agenda in my relationship with you, as that increases, trust goes down. But if we're connected and we have a relationship where you believe I have your best interests at heart, potentially trust could become infinite.
Jane, can I ask you just about, obviously, that it would be easy for some people perhaps to consider this as, you know, it's just an equation, but obviously it's dynamic and there's lots of causal mechanisms involved. What would you say about the dynamics of that equation? Where are the big shifts in it?
Well, it's interesting because we're going to explore this a little bit further as we go through as to what really impacts trust. And I do think that the equation is true, that I think if we detect self-interest or we think we're being played by somebody because they're after something, I think that really does undermine trust. So it's there as a denominator for a reason. I think the others are added together and not multiplied in terms of the factors. And there's been much discussion about whether they should be multiplied or whether they should just be added to each other. Because if you multiply them, if you lose one of those top four, you would then by definition end up with 0 on the top. And that can't be right. Because you can have a level of trust with somebody, a bus driver, for example, or a pilot in an aeroplane who actually you're never going to meet. You're never going to have a really close relationship with that bus driver or that pilot. And yet you would trust them because you believe that they actually want to land the plane and not crash it. And that some people have done some checks to make sure that they are competent to actually fly the plane. So that's why those are additions rather than multipliers on the top. Does that help? John, you were going to make a comment, I think. I can't see everybody.
Yeah, I'm thinking some of this is builds on experience. I mean, for instance, we talk about male bonding through alcohol abuse. That's probably a first connection. But if that becomes a business relationship, you almost start again.
Yeah.
Go on, John.
Hi. I have a question around self-interest. There's an implication there, which it sounds like in the discussion, it sounded like one, which is their self-interest damages my self-interest. That in other words, the more it goes up, the more mine goes down. Now, I think that's not necessarily correct. If we have complementary goals, then the self-interest, the person actually may come to form a relationship with me because I can help them achieve their objective, and without me, they won't be able to. So I have a query around about what self-interest actually means. Yeah. And that on that basis.
Yeah, thanks, John. It is defined as having your own agenda. So it comes in sort of multiple guises. So if we talk about people having hidden agendas, don't we? So I think where an agenda is visible and we're working together on something, then I don't think it does hinder trust. I think it helps promote trust because it's a shared goal. Where it becomes a damaging thing is if either you enter into a relationship perceiving something about me, and then you discover that actually my intentions or my agenda is completely different, as in I'm a con artist, then it really is going to undermine trust. So it isn't the fact, we have to accept that everybody has an agenda all the time. We all have them around all sorts of things, but it's at what point does that become a positive thing and at what point does it become a damaging thing? And I think the scale is somewhere between what you're talking about is somebody wanting to work with you to actually further your good. And it might be their agendas aligned with that. So if the agenda of the person is about seeking your well-being and sharing your passions for something, then that is going to be a positive thing, which will build trust. If the agenda is about, I'm just in this relationship for what I can get out of you, and then actually I'm not bothered, then that's a different matter.
Yeah, but there's another state, and that is that I'm clear about my agenda. What do I want to achieve? It's not what you want to achieve, and that's okay by me, because we're in a relationship, and I want you I want you, for example, to help me achieve acceptance at the club, at the rugby club. I want to get into the rugby club, and you can help me do that.
Yeah.
Now, you may not be interested in rugby. You may be, but you may know the chairman very well. So I've come to you quite clear on my agenda and said, well, look, I want you to help me do this. There's no real relationship involved, but I've been quite clear about my self-interest, and I'll be grateful. But that's where it ends.
Yeah.
And certainly what happens, I find, in negotiation is that in the beginning of the interaction, one of the first things you have to do is to discover exactly why they're talking to you. So why are you talking to me? And if we're talking about doing something together, I've got to find out whether you have got the ability and the authority to actually do something. So that kind of behavior is very useful, and that's not done enough, because if it works properly, you develop a relationship which can deliver something.
Yeah.
If things are left unsaid or not interrogated sufficiently, then somewhere along the line of that, you're going to be disappointed and trust's going to fall through the floor.
Yeah, and I think there's, this applies in all sorts of circumstances, the trust equation, but there are obviously some relationships which are going to be very long lasting. And Deming talked quite a bit about constancy of purpose, didn't he, and leadership with an organisation. So if I perceive that your leadership of this organisation is about you getting the next big pay packet, and actually you're just a stepping stone onto your next big pay packet, then I'm going to struggle to trust you as a leader in my organisation. And similarly, if we're talking about short-term contracts as opposed to long-term partnerships, that's where all of these things come into play, because we can have relationships in our lives that are incredibly transactional. And we have relationships in our lives that are incredibly long-lasting, both business and professional. And I guess all this is doing, the trust equation, is trying to lay out what the different aspects are of how trust is put into place and how it develops over time.
And I've just got a quick question, if I may. I'm just curious to understand what people's thoughts are about, does this equation hold true in glorious isolation, and or is it affected by context? Because I'm beginning to think that, well, we know that behaviour is influenced as much by the context, the prevailing system, as it is by the innate kind of characteristics of the individual. So I'm wondering whether, does the context affect some of those things, those 5 things that build up the equation, or is that just another layer over the top? So if I'm, for instance, put in a highly kind of adversarial situation, I will behave differently and I will have different expectations of people, and you can see all sorts of things getting pulled out of shape.
Yeah, I'm going to move us on, because you're going to have the opportunity in the breakout room to sort of explore that in terms of high trust and low trust environments and what impacts those things. And I think context is quite important. So hold those thoughts and questions and use the time in the breakout room to explore that. And then maybe you can give us some of your reflections back again. But I think the reality is that the context does play a part. And I just want to share with you, before we go into the breakout rooms, the process of creating trust. So when we first encounter a relationship, we have the context or the introduction. So we talked about being introduced to somebody by someone we know, or it being in a cold environment, or it's an email that drops into your email box, which basically says, hello, I'm a software developer, I can fix all your problems and promote you to #1 in the Google store. So it's, the context or introduction plays a part. And then we have the first contact. So some of us are actually encountering each other for the first time today. Some of us will have really long-standing relationships that have been built up over a number of years, and we will have spent hours and hours in the same room together. So all of those things play into the dynamics of even an encounter in a meeting like this. But when we have first contact with somebody, there's all sorts of things that we are trying to establish in that process. So who are you? What do I think about you? Personality, all of those different things, the environment in which we get introduced to that person. And then what happens is we go through a testing phase with people. So we begin to work out whether you are actually trustworthy or not. And often that will take the form of tasks or agreements. Oh yes, I'll ring you. Send me your email details. Yes, we'll follow that up later. And whether those things ever actually happen can just be an indicator of whether that relationship actually ever goes any further or not. So we're basically setting an expectation and then working out whether those expectations will be met by the person that we're encountering. And then we go into a building phase. So we've established some ground rules, maybe about what you're wanting from this relationship or the shared interest that we have, whether you will sort of deliver on things that you're asked to do. And then we move into a building phase with other people. And then we get into a maturing phase. And obviously some of our relationships won't ever go beyond first contact because they're transactional. You know, if you go and buy a newspaper or a pint of milk, you may never see the same person serving you in the shop again, but you may have a very long-standing relationship with your local shopkeeper, you know, where it's a kind of a much deeper relationship. And I think the isolation thing is probably throwing into sharp relief those relationships that we already have, that we rely on, and making it quite challenging to form new relationships, because so much information is literally the first contact is the handshake. And we're in a world at the moment where we can't do that. You physically cannot touch anybody else, and rarely can you be in the same space as anybody else. And as human beings, that gives us an inordinate amount of feedback when we're building and developing relationships. So I just wanted to share that with you because it is a process. It doesn't happen all at once, and it can take time, and actually it can be interrupted by things like separation or difficulty in contact. And I think the world that we're in at the moment is sort of playing into this, you know, how this process actually works and builds. So what I want to do is give you a bit of time to sort of reflect on those things, both the trust equation in terms of what does a high trust environment look like, and you'll have experience of this, I hope, from different you know, work environments or personal environments. And then what are the real benefits of having high trust in a relationship? So once you get to that building and maturing phase in a relationship, what does that enable you to do in your personal life, in your work life? So we're going to drop you back out into breakout rooms to just explore some of this around high trust environments. And then we're going to have another conversation in a couple of minutes about low trust. But let's look at the positive stuff first. So what does it look like when it works really, really well? So this will be your opportunity to share all the good stuff that you've had experience of with people in your breakout rooms. Okay.
How long have we got, Elaine? How long in the breakout rooms?
We'll give you about 5 minutes, 4 or 5 minutes probably. Is that okay?
Jane, sorry, Jane. Yeah.
Okay, we'll see you in a minute.
Can you see the chat? There's an interesting message from
sorry if we broke into your very exciting conversations, but we are going to send you back into exactly the same group discussions in a moment or two, so you can follow up your high trust conversations with as we get into the discussion about low trust. So we're going to just do that. Sorry, in a minute, I'm just screen sharing again. So I wanted to put this up and just invite you to share anything else that came up in your conversations. So this list is sort of based on sessions that I've run previously where people have identified the sorts of things that really build trust, and they were characteristic of high trust environments. The original source is obviously from Stephen Covey, but are there any other things, just kind of one words, because we do not have long together this afternoon, I'm sorry, but is there anything that you think is missing from that list that came up in your conversations?
Just a word that I use sometimes with things is proximity. It's like how tightly woven you feel with this. I quite get to discuss it. I have my closest friends are people I went to secondary school with. Now, we all had a very tight and interesting all boys boarding school experience, and because we had a very intense shared experience, you know, we're all brothers. We are like family, but clearly we're obviously not related, but it's an incredibly high trust because we have that shared experience, that really common environment. So you talk about context previously, but we can take that into any other context because we kind of know the real person. You know, you've seen it. You have go through the same teenage experiences with somebody else, but there's lots of things. You know, Stockholm syndrome is another, that sort of shared experience where you suddenly find yourself going through the same experience, same reactions. That's a very intense part of a trust building.
I would say that forgiveness is an important part.
Oh, interesting one.
Yeah, because then people feel safe to make mistakes, and when you can do that, things do get done and may even be innovative.
Yeah,
like
we had lack of blame being discussed in our group, which is a close cousin, John.
Yeah. Yes.
One of the things that this might sound a little bit left of field, but I did a blog about this recently actually. One of the things that's not on that list for me, where I have seen it work, is where you have as a team shared practices. So literally, almost in a way you could think of it as ritual. Doesn't have to be ritual, but shared practice. And when those practices occur in a physical way, that really does help to build trust. Physical movement, for example, I have a particular lens in the way that I look at things, but using the body in some way so it's beyond just the cognitive processing.
Yeah, and I think you'd say that in sort of places like, you know, people sing together, those sorts of things as well, those kinesthetic activities. Thank you for that. I am going to, if there's anything else, please post in the chat as well. I'm going to move you back into your breakout rooms just to think about the flip side of this around low trust, and we are going to follow on from the low trust conversation to talk about breakdown of trust, and I'll pick up on John's comment about forgiveness and the sort of blame thing when we get into that. So Mark's going to drop you back into the breakout rooms. Stop sharing. Oh, sorry. Yes, okay, so off you go. Low trust now. What does it look like when it's not working? Okay. Yes. Wednesday, 6:30 till 8, exactly the same session. So if that's a more convenient time, you're very welcome to, you know, to join us next week.
Yeah, both of these were in heavy work times for me, but
that's fine.
I was gonna, I'll see if I can shift meetings around, but I might not be able to. But
no, that's fine, no problem. So what we're going to get now is people coming back from the breakout rooms talking about low trust environments, and then we're going to be moving on to think about breakdown of trust in relationships.
no, that's amazing. So I assume this is your background more in oh, Callie.
Yeah, a little bit.
We're just about to lose Ed. He's got to go.
Okay, we're back.
Oh right, okay, yeah. Okay, I think we got everybody back. Yes.
I think so.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. I think Ed, you're about to disappear, aren't you? So,
Indeed, I am. I'm going to literally leave now. I have to go collect somebody from.
no, that's
school
fine.
there. And they're very particular that you arrive at your slot to avoid contaminating the
Yes,
rest of the world.
indeed. Yeah, that's really important. Okay, so so you've now had a chance to talk about high trust and low trust environments and what they tell you. So I'm going to do the same thing again and share my screen. We've got Benjamin, who's just joined us. So I've just been kind of filling him in a little bit on what we've been doing so far. So sorry, I'd gone back on the slide deck. Sorry, everybody. These again are some of the things which people have come back with and said these are the things that inhibit trust. So these are the things you see in a low trust environment. So again, same question really. Are there things which you talked about in your groups that are not on this list that I think would be helpful to share with the group?
I would probably add defensive. That tends to come out. Defensive behaviours amongst many or some or all. Potentially exhaustion. It could be exhausting.
Yeah. They take more energy, low trust environments, don't they? Definitely. They demand more of us.
Yep.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if another one here is about the feeling of powerlessness. If history has told you this is a dangerous place, don't swim with your head above water.
Yeah.
Can I ask about the inability to say sorry? One of the things you see a lot of at the moment, Jane, is people doing something that damages somebody else. Might be very minor, but it does. And they say, oh, sorry, and gone. And it's a way of, to me, it's a way of them clearing their conscience that they've said sorry and moved on. Yet they've not really inquired whether what they did had injured the other person.
Yeah.
To say sorry, I have a bit of difficulty with that one.
Yes. Okay. Hold that thought, Kevin, because we're going to explore all of this as we go through the process of where trust breaks down and what happens when people get damaged, we get damaged through situations. So I absolutely hear what you're saying. And I think it does fit with the, it feeds into our choices about, whether we can repair trust and rebuild, really. Are there any other comments people want to make? Because I am very conscious of time. We're trying to pack a lot into this.
Jane, I'd add in inability to have skillful conversations.
Oh, yes, nice. Yeah.
Well, that's a good one.
Or also difficult conversations, which is it's the sort of avoiding the issues, but that comes up again and again for me working with all sorts of organisations. And it's absolutely linked to that, because you can try and have a conversation, then do it in a very, very clumsy way. Yeah,
and building on that, I think as well about finding the commonalities between the differences in groups or people, especially when people are passionate about their thoughts.
Great. Okay. Thank you very much for your sort of contribution, and as always, just post stuff in the chat if I haven't had a chance to sort of pick up your comments, but I want to make sure that we do sort of trot through the the things that we said we would cover today. So I'm just going to go back to sharing my screen. Okay, so there are some factors which affect trust, and I use a 3 C's model when I'm working with organisations a lot around leadership, but each of these 3 facets does influence our ability to trust as well. So how we view the competency, either whether we trust ourselves, so our own competency in situations, or the competency of other people, our capacity to be able to do it. So if we're hyper busy or somebody else is hyper busy and we don't think they've got the physical, mental, emotional, spiritual background, and not background, but bandwidth to be able to do things, and our confidence in ourselves and confidence in other people as well. So we're going to do a quick poll now. So hopefully you've done a poll before on Zoom, but it is very straightforward. So Mark's going to set that up, and you've just got 2 quick questions. The question is the same, but what impacts your, what's the greatest impact on your ability to trust yourself and someone else? You can pick an individual and just answer the question. Okay. We'll display the results. All anonymized, in case you're worried, all anonymized.
I think I've messed mine up. I've answered wrong.
Oh, okay. That's okay.
There's an indication of trust.
That's okay. Yeah, just waiting for 3 more responses to the question. Oh no.
How nice. How nice to be allowed to get it wrong and not have any consequences.
Yeah, absolutely not.
Okay.
Yes, and end the poll, please do, Mark, and share the results. Okay, interesting. So you're the first group that I've done this with in a sort of live environment, asking this question just to see what's, you know, what comes out. So interesting that it's confidence in ourselves, that we don't trust ourselves in situations, and it's about our confidence in ourselves. And then with other people, it seems to be competence that is the major factor. So the purpose of doing that is just to sort of see for ourselves as individuals, so how we view ourselves and how we view other people, our ability to trust ourselves to do things and our ability to trust other people are interlinked and interconnected. So I'm not saying these results should be the same at all, but because our ability to trust other people is based on our ability to make that decision about whether to trust somebody else, then if we find it quite hard to trust ourselves around things, trust our own decision making, for example, it then can play into our ability to trust other people and to trust in other situations. So I'm just putting it out there as a...
I find that difficult to believe.
Yeah.
Yeah, the top tells me, the top tells me that there's a lot of experience there, that my confidence in my capacity and in my competence, as opposed to as much as anything else, will absolutely impact on my confidence, and vice versa.
Yeah.
So if the other person, and I think it's so interesting that the other one is their competence, is the one thing that I don't know how confident they are. I'm not sure what capacity means, but I sure as hell can check out quite quickly their competence.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, so I'm going to move us on. It's sort of just a little bit of an aside, really, in terms of the trust stuff, but I do think these 3 areas impact and play into our ability to do things. Can I get rid of the poll screen? Yes, I can. Yes, great. Yeah, thank you. Lovely. So I want to think about breakdown of trust just in the last few minutes that we've got together. So I don't know whether it's ever occurred to you, but all of the language around the breakdown of trust is incredibly mechanical. and it's all to do with cars as well. So if you've never thought about that, I hope this will, it'll just be one of those things where you won't be able to not see it now. But again, we talk about breakdown, don't we? Breakdown of relationships. And we talk about trust being damaged or relationships being damaged, wrecked, or we even use the language of it's a write-off, this relationship. I've just written them off, there's no way back from that. I can see some of you are smiling and nodding, so that's good. But if you haven't thought about it before, it's a good way of looking at it. So when trust gets damaged in a relationship, we have an opportunity to repair that. Now, obviously, it depends on what the level of damage is in a relationship and actually how important the relationship maybe is to us. So if we have bad customer service in a shop, and actually it's a shop that we don't visit very often, it might not make much difference and we'll just go and shop somewhere else. So, you might choose to just say, well, actually I can, this is not important to me, so I don't really need to repair this. But if it's a relationship with parent, sibling, child, it is going to warrant some investment and repair. Having a relationship wrecked is not a blip in the windscreen, but it's more like taking the wing off your car. So it's not that the car's a write-off, but you've got a decision to make about, is it salvageable, is it not, and how much is it going to cost me to actually to do this and make this happen. And then we talk about relationships which are write-offs, so we choose to walk away. And as individuals, we have a tolerance and a level, I think, to which we're prepared to repair, salvage, or walk away. We've all got thresholds around that, and they're influenced by multiple things. And when I do sessions with people, I would do half a day just looking at breakdown of trust and repair. So we are really skirting over this this afternoon, but it's just to give you a feel for what happens. So if we're into the repair territory, I'd suggest that the faster we respond to something, and this goes back to the saying sorry, the quicker we are to acknowledge the fact that there has been a problem, the easier it is to repair something. So there is that kind of that triage that can happen quite quickly. Now that might mean that something has happened and it might still need some deeper diagnosis, because what we've experienced as damage in that relationship, non-delivery of something, could be down to the fact that that person is in a really bad way. There's all sorts of stuff going on in their lives that you have got no visibility of. And so sometimes we just need to understand what was the reason why that thing didn't get delivered or that thing didn't happen. But sometimes it can just be the rapid response of saying, I'm really sorry, I let you down around that. I apologize, and it won't happen again. I'm the sort of person that's very last minute. We shouldn't have set the deadline so late. It needed to be earlier, whatever it is. So just being honest about it. When the relationship is wrecked and we're into salvage, we do need to know some deeper diagnosis, because it can be that a whole load of damage happens and then it just gets more and more and more because we never do anything about it. We just go, oh, it's fine, it's fine. It's just fine, it's just fine. And we don't really do anything to rebuild the trust or reset the expectations. And so much of this is about violated expectations in terms of the breakdown of trust. And then we get into the stage of things being written off, and this could be business relationships, personal relationships, and I don't want to unearth a whole load of sort of difficult territory for people. But probably all of us in some shape or form have had a situation where we've walked away from a relationship. And we may well have tried really hard in the middle section of the relationship being wrecked, and it's we've tried to salvage it and we've been around the deeper diagnosis, but actually there comes a point where we find that we need to walk away from the relationship. But the language is incredibly mechanical around this. It's incredibly mechanical. The there is a whole sort of agenda that sits behind this. Mark and I both are involved in leadership in a church, and we do a lot of pastoral work with people. And whilst you can talk about relationships being damaged and doing repair, there's also a lot of conversation about the emotional impact of this, which this sort of language that we have doesn't really surface and reflect that. So the ability to say sorry, but also the ability to really forgive, to let yourself off the hook, to let somebody else off the hook around things, you know, to sort of recognize bitterness and all of those other emotional things which build into a relationship where trust has broken down. So it's a complicated thing, but what I wanted to share with you is just this, I suppose, high level picture of where we are from a society point of view as to how we talk about trust. But like I say, we could spend a couple of hours just digging into this. Yeah, sorry, go on.
Well, it's very interesting to me when the language is mechanical and yet trust is a felt sense. Trust is something we feel, and yet the conversations about repairing it or the breakdown are mechanical. I'm really, really curious about that. How it's almost like we've disconnected in the way we think about trust. We've disconnected from the felt sense of trust.
Yeah.
And that felt sense tells us why it's so important.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was wondering a similar thing. I mean, 100 years ago, were these the types, 120 years ago before cars, like what, was there a different way of describing this?
Yeah, I don't know. I find it, I haven't dug into the linguistic journey about why all of this has been, I've got theories. It's because it's a problem to be fixed, isn't it? A damaged relationship is a problem to be fixed. So there's almost an engineering analytical approach been taken to this, that if we can break it down into a set of tasks, maybe we can work our way through it and find a way to repair it. But I'm just kind of conscious because we said we'd do an hour and a half on this. So I don't want to cut off discussion. And what we're going to do is leave this room open for sort of 10 or 15 minutes after the session. But for those of you that do have to scoot off at 3:30, I want to make sure that we've sort of explored the material that we said we would. But I wanted to put it up there because for me, it's been a revelation in terms of following the whole thing around trust, from how it's built to what happens. And this is my analysis of how we look at it. This is the, if you like, the Together People view of what goes on around trust and how we describe it. Somebody was about to chip in, but I can't see everybody.
Okay, Jane, I was just going to raise the point about the language, and I think Beverly covered that very well.
Yeah.
But we also live in a world of escalating superlatives. And you only need to look at the news, and every reporter has got to put an even more damning adjective in front of something else in order to get themselves above the noise level that's going on generally in society. And I wonder if that's just a zero-sum game.
Yeah,
or the race to the bottom.
Yeah, I think there's probably something in that, but I think for me, my observation would be, this is the language in circulation in society at the moment about how we describe these things.
I think that's the point I'm making. We've got ourselves into a compact vocabulary that is not necessarily helpful.
Yes.
And I'd also say, and maybe, the research around trust, maybe this has been done ever since the 50s, 60s, I don't know, you'll know, Jane, but, who were the people, whether it was mainly male, I'm going to get a little bit biased here, but male dominated, in which case our languages come from this. And I think there's a lot in that. I mean, Jackie Lefebvre's values, she's doing a PhD at the moment, typically on that, where she looked at the values and the terminology used for the descriptions, and now is trying to look to see if we can actually get images brought into that more, because it's about values, not about a physical thing in the world.
Yeah.
So
it is
very interesting.
Yeah, and it's one of the reasons why I did want to share this with you as a group, but it is a whole piece in and of itself where we really, really do explore this with people to sort of help them get to grips with how they view relationships and what their options are in terms of relationships that they've got, and time to reflect on maybe those relationships that they've walked away from, and how prepared are we to invest and rebuild in relation, or are our relationships quite transactional? So all of those sorts of things. I'm going to move us on to the last piece, because we could talk about this forever. So this is my other observation really around trust, is it can feel a bit like a game of snakes and ladders, I think. So it's something that gets built step by step. Sometimes we get nice surprises around trust. So people do things and we find that our relationship with them is in maybe a different place. It can also get destroyed in one fell swoop as well, because we don't see things coming, or stuff is happening off stage, so life happens to people, or we don't see people taking personal responsibility. But I think around trust, there is always a choice about what we do, you know, to either be trust builders, to choose to invest and be trust repairers, to try and find that common ground, common language, to reconnect people. And it's our own personal decision, or it's an organizational decision as to what is the walk away point for particular relationships as well. I'm not sure we quite have time, do we? No. I was going to get you to do a final session to just get you thinking about what your snakes and what your ladders might be, and what would constitute a sort of walk away position. But maybe that's a bit of thought homework for you to do. So where have you had really nice surprises in relationships that have really built trust? Or maybe you've had that experience yourself, you've done something and it's really benefited a relationship. And what are the snakes really? What are the things where you've had something that's just come in left field and it's just wrecked and destroyed a relationship? And for you personally, you know, what would make you walk away? And these are really personal things, so I don't want to share them in the wider group, because I think the threshold for these things it is different for all of us, depending on our experience. And it takes us back to where we were, you know, much earlier in this conversation about everything that has happened in our lives affects our sort of picture of trust. And to pick up John's point from earlier on as well, our ability to sort of forgive and to let go of things, but in a genuine way where we're you know, we can have a proper conversation with other people about that, because it's you know, we can you know, allow people to sort of be, if you like, released from maybe our unrealistic expectations. Sometimes we need to release ourselves from our own realistic expectations, actually, so that we can build that sort of confidence in ourselves. But it is a complicated area, really. So I suppose just a couple of questions for you to walk away with. We've had a real whistle-stop tour around this subject this afternoon, but maybe what might you want to do differently as a result of the conversations or the things that you've reflected on this afternoon, and where might you want to build more trust? I think the reality is that where we are at the moment, we all need each other, and we're all needing to trust each other actually for our health and well-being at the moment. We need to you know, do what's right for ourselves, but also for those around us. And I think trust is a very, very precious commodity at the moment, you know, given the environment that we're in around COVID. So I'd like to thank you all for joining us today and for contributing to the session. We are going to leave the room open for another sort of 10-15 minutes. So if you want to stay and chat a bit more or post questions, then please feel free to do that. and our contact details are there if you want to follow up anything with Mark or I off the back of today's session. But yeah, thank you very much for being with us. John, is there anything you want to say to sort of wrap up about future sessions or anything?
Well, first thing is to say, if you've enjoyed this, please tell your friends to come along to the repeat next week, because it won't be quite the same. It might even be going off in a different direction, and I'm looking forward to joining that one as well.
That's Jane, if we go right back to the beginning.